We saw an opportunity here by moving it up to the weekend prior to Thanksgiving to simply dominate a weekend and to get a running head start into the Thanksgiving holiday and then into the Christmas holiday. And quite frankly, I think we'll have a conversation into next year as to how well this title continues to perform. It's just that special. It is just something that really delivers at a theater, and the audience is just absolutely loving it. The word of mouth on the title is incredibly positive.
This is the Box Office Podcast. I'm Daniel Luria, the editorial director of Box Office Pro, the pulse of theatrical exhibition. And in today's episode, we are going to be going over the great opening weekend of Wicked and Gladiator 2 on the heels of the Moana 2 debut, which already has come out if you're listening to this on Thursday or even any other day, because that movie comes out before this episode launches. And from there, we will be going over to our sponsored segment this week, brought to you by the Box Office Company's Boost division. My colleague Malcolm McMillan joins us to talk about the TikTok strategy for cinemas, especially right now. This is something very important for movie theaters to keep in mind as we enter a very important holiday season at the movies. And then finally, in our feature segment, Albert Lawrence joins us once again to go over the December slate at the box office. Now, we went through all of the wide releases in December in last week's episode, along with our box office forecast. So if you want to hear about the big movies coming in December, tune in to the prior episode in this series. If you want to hear about all the limited releases, the sort of movies that won't get a massive theatrical release out of the gate, this is the episode to find those movies and hear our insights on them. That is coming up in the second half of this episode. But let's get this started. Rebecca, Chad, we have a lot to go over because it was a big opening weekend here from both Wicked and Gladiator 2. Let's start on the Universal front. Rebecca, Wicked claiming the highest opening weekend for a Broadway adaptation with $112.5 million domestically.
Daniel, definitely a big weekend from Wicked. A score bullet list full of records. Always good to see those come in on Monday morning. 112.5 million domestic, 50 million overseas. We had the demo, I think, a kind of expected skew towards female audiences. 72% were female, 67% 25 plus. About 50% of them were actually exactly 50% were in the 18 to 34 range, 54% Caucasian, 21 Hispanic, 13 African American, 8% Asian audiences in that first opening weekend. I'm actually as having to duck out midway through taping here because I'm heading out to see it myself. I thought I'd have no problem getting a good seat on like a Monday evening. But no,
but it's competitive, right? That's a big part of this story because the opening weekend ticket sales for Wicked aren't going to tell the entire story. We warned listeners about this last week. And if you look at our final opening weekend forecast, we said we expected 120 to 140, but we did bring up that caveat. This isn't an opening weekend performance. The performance is going to be spread out through a lot of the midweek. Well, I want to talk a little bit about those audience demographics because we keep on tracking what this recovery in moviegoing looks like for all age groups, for different gender splits here. Universal claiming a huge victory in that 72% of that opening weekend audience for Wicked was female, and 2/3 of that audience was above the age of 25. That's a really hard demo to crack. I'm really happy that we saw this result like this, and I really expect this to continue building in the coming weeks. I got an opportunity to speak with Universal's president of domestic theatrical distribution, Jim Orr, over the weekend on Sunday to get his reaction to these opening weekend numbers. Here's an excerpt from that conversation.
Well, we're not at all surprised by really the incredible debut of Wicked here domestically and globally this weekend, even at these incredible figures. Not sure if you've had a chance to see it, but John M. Chu's direction of this beloved property is just incredible. The performances of Cynthia and Ariana are absolutely captivating, and audiences are reacting accordingly. Our critical and our audience reaction scores are off the charts. Anecdotally, we're hearing about people showing up at theaters all across the country dressed up, as the characters and things like that in the spirit of it. And it's just so much fun when something captures the imagination and really encourages people to get out into theaters and really experience a film. And that's the best way to see Wicked, is just on the biggest screen possible and just with a large audience.
Now, another big part of this was putting Wicked on the right release date in the calendar. It's going to be a really competitive holiday corridor here with a lot of titles competing for screens. By moving this up to the weekend before Thanksgiving, Wicked was really able to own most of that weekend, even though it shared a lot of that success with Gladiator 2. Here's Jim Moore telling us on how that release date strategy came into fruition.
We saw an opportunity here by moving it up to the weekend prior to Thanksgiving to simply dominate a weekend and to get a running head start into the Thanksgiving holiday and then into the Christmas holiday. And quite frankly, I think we'll have a conversation into next year as to how well this title continues to perform. It's just that special. It is just something that really delivers at a theater, and the audience is just absolutely loving it. The word of mouth on the title is incredibly positive. So I agree completely. I think we're going to be in theaters for quite some time.
And finally, another crucial element of this weekend's success for Wicked was that support from theaters on the marketing side. Jim Moore wanted to make sure to highlight the importance of those marketing efforts that movie theaters played in making this opening weekend such a success for Universal.
The extent to which theaters have gone to decorate their lobbies and to make audiences feel welcome into the theater has just been very gratifying to see. We have a lot of concession programs. We have, I believe this number is correct, we have 400 brand partners globally. And a lot of that has made its way into theaters as well. And so it's just everywhere, and in a very positive and in a very great and fun way. And obviously those results from our marketing campaign, which again, as I'm sure you've probably heard me say before, I think we have the greatest marketing engine of this entire industry. I really don't think it's arguable. And again, the campaign on Wicked is just living proof of that. One other thing I'll mention kind of related to that, not necessarily in theater lobbies, but I would also say, I think it'd be good to point out that Cynthia and Ariana and the entire cast and John and Chu really worked this title from a marketing and from a publicity standpoint as hard or harder than I've ever seen any campaign work. They did everything we asked them to do, and they were just great at it.
And that was Jim Orr, the president of theatrical distribution domestically for Universal Pictures. A big thank you for his participation in this week's episode. Now let's move over to the Paramount half of this analysis. Gladiator 2 opening to $55 million domestically last weekend. It had opened overseas in select markets the prior weekend, so we knew we could expect a strong performance from this title. Like Wicked, a little bit under that opening weekend range that we expected coming into this weekend. But like Wicked, this is a performance that will spread out well into the holiday season. The audience demos here were equally as interesting. Chad, what were some of those highlights from the demographics?
Yeah, we had 61% male, 39% female, and then age-wise, 49% 18 to 34, and then within that, 28% 25 to 34. And then the other 48% was 35 and above. And then the ethnicity breakdown there, 56% Caucasian, 22% Hispanic, 12% Black, 5% Asian, and 5% multicultural.
That's really interesting, especially as we look at that opportunity on making sure that different segments of the audience have something for a weekend. 72% female on Wicked, 61% male on Gladiator 2. This formula works. It's proven, and it will continue to work throughout the coming weeks as more audiences find these movies. Now, when we talk about the entire geography of the United States, different circuits have different performances on these titles. Rebecca, we've got some data from Paramount on some of those markets where the movie over and under indexed.
Daniel, the film over-indexed in the western and south central U.S., under-indexing in the Midwest and Northeast regions. We have a lot of the major markets over-indexing, those being Los Angeles, New York, San Francisco, D.C., Toronto, Miami, San Diego, Montreal, and Vancouver. The only major market to under-index was Orlando. Top theaters, again, from the same New York, LA, Toronto, Houston. Canada, very strong market share of around 10%, around 8% of locations. So, yeah, I think this one, if you look at the demographics, and it's going to be tied to Wicked. I feel like we're still going to see a lot of that counter programming traffic of families not wanting to see the same film.
It's interesting that Orlando under-indexed. Obvious when you consider that cannibalizing effect that Medieval Times likely had on the film. I mean, if you've got entertainment like that, eating a turkey leg with an extra large Pepsi.
Don't say Medieval Times
you
and
watch it in person.
cannibalizing.
No, right?
In the same sentence.
I don't want to give myself up here, but for my 21st birthday, my friends and I was in Miami. We drove up from Miami to Orlando with the sole intention of sitting through Medieval Times heavily intoxicated. My apologies to anyone that attended that August 3rd, 2007 performance at the Medieval Times in Orlando. I'm a different man now, and I will be behaving much better at my screening of Gladiator 2 this coming week, because both my tickets, guys, for Gladiator 2 and for Wicked are for Thanksgiving week. I imagine I'm not the only one. I'm really looking forward to these movies. And this phenomenon isn't something that's only happening in the US. I think this is a great transition to our branded segment with Malcolm McMillan from the Box Office Company. He's going to be going over the UK performance for Wicked in particular, which just scored the highest opening weekend in the United Kingdom of 2024, and also going over the importance of making sure you have the right social media strategy to make sure that you don't miss audiences like this next time we have a huge movie on the horizon. That is coming up in our sponsored segment right after this break. And we are back here on the Box Office Podcast with Box Office Company's Malcolm McMillan from the Boost division of the company, which offers e-commerce and digital solutions for exhibitors. All of the website needs, all of the app needs, and anything that exists in that digital ecosystem is part of Malcolm's purview. Malcolm, joining us from Glasgow, Scotland in your podcast debut. Welcome. It took you a while.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. That's really kind of you to have me on.
Yeah, well, we had to just find space for you after a while, Malcolm, and we decided to give you prime real estate here after the highest opening weekend of the year for the UK and Ireland, $17.6 million for Wicked, the highest grossing opening weekend for a stage musical in UK box office history. And man, were theaters packed. I saw a report from Universal that the Odeon Leicester Square, one of those iconic cinemas in the UK, had one of its best days over the weekend since Oppenheimer opened. I mean, it must have been fantastic. You were in London over the weekend, am I correct?
Yeah, I was actually. I was actually at Moana 2 premiere, which was also fantastic. And that was packed, and the whole of the square was packed. That was actually at the Cineworld, Leicester Square, not the Odeon. But still, it's really great to see fantastic movies coming in and people getting out to watch them. And frankly, when I hear the kind of list of records that there are in the UK, it's really uplifting because we've all had a tough time of it over the last few years. So let's see positives for the future here, I think.
Yeah, last few years tough, but the last few weeks, Malcolm, November has been one to remember for the UK market, starting with that debut of Paddington in Peru that just did fantastic business. Nearly £10 million on its opening weekend, has continued to gross very well. Last week, we saw the debut of Gladiator 2, which is now going into its third weekend as we enter this following frame ahead of us. So Paddington now in the market for a number of weeks, Gladiator holding really well, and Wicked coming in, breaking records. We've got Moana ahead of us. You mentioned, Malcolm, that you were there for the premiere in London. What was the reaction of the people attending to the film?
Honestly, really positive across the board. Got such good vibes from people as we left. I mean, I wouldn't naturally be an audience member for Moana. I took my son and his girlfriend, who were much more she was at least, much more into the franchise. But I really enjoyed it. It was so uplifting. And I think you get the best reaction from the younger members of the audience who were gasping and squealing with delight. So really good fun. And also, I think a big shout out to Dwayne Johnson, who really did the most amazing work on the sand carpet, not the red carpet. And as he walked down and talked to so many fans, and also a lot of YouTubers, TikTokers, and other media outlets, which probably brings us on to what we want to talk about.
That's absolutely right, Malcolm. That's what we wanted to bring you in here today to talk about, is the importance of social media marketing for exhibitors today. Now, we know when it comes to media outlets, we know when it comes to big movies, the viral nature of content is super important, making sure that you have tailored content around all your social media platforms. But that's not enough. Really, this is something that cinemas should be doing a lot more, should be a lot more proactive in tackling. And you recently held a webinar with exhibitors on how to really get a good TikTok strategy, since that is one of the biggest social media platforms out there. What is the importance of TikTok to an exhibitor?
I think that's a really interesting area, and we got a lot of people turning up to our webinars. It's actually the second of our webinars that we've done on social media. We thought we'd focus specifically on TikTok, mainly because around 67% of the users of TikTok are between the ages of 18 and 34, and that's split evenly between the 18 to 24 and the 25 to 34 groups. And for that reason alone, it makes it really important for us. Obviously, we want to try and get this audience coming to the cinema more often. I think distributors and studios know the value of social media for film discovery, but it's really important for cinemas as well to try and access this audience and present their brands, their experiences, their different PLF options, etc., to a younger audience and get them in and get them back into the habit of coming into the cinema. So TikTok represents, I think, possibly the biggest growing source of or access to this audience, and is actually sitting behind YouTube in terms of monthly average users. YouTube last year, I think, did 22.7 billion monthly active users, and TikTok reached 1.5 billion, but it has this amazing sort of ability for user-generated content, and I think that's where the opportunity really lies.
Mm-hmm. And we've been seeing a lot of those activations happen for moviegoers themselves in cinema lobbies when they go, sharing some of those experiences, sharing some of those standees, even collectible concessions merchandising that they get excited about. But cinemas can activate that social media power in different ways. Let's go over some of the major takeaways from that webinar that you held on TikTok strategy. What's the number one advice you would give exhibitors based on that conversation you had last week?
By the way, I'm not the expert here. We had Julien Drouet, who runs Allociné in France and Filmstarts and Movie Pilot in Germany.
Those are some of the biggest B2C movie websites in those respective markets. So yeah, while Malcolm and myself are a little bit more B2B oriented, our colleagues in the B2C world, they know what they're talking about here.
Yeah, no, and he did a great job of it as well. I think the key outtakes I got from it really were, one, to keep it real. And what that means is, don't be too polished with your TikTok output. I think there's a danger of brands trying to, put in high production values, etc. Actually, what customers on TikTok seem to be looking for is a lot more in terms of honesty. They like to trust people, and they'll trust you more if you're very, very honest with them and give them information that maybe they wouldn't, you would normally hide in an advertising campaign, or you wouldn't talk about in an advertising campaign.
That's really interesting. So it's very different than, let's say, a regular video ad that you would create for different mediums. So you're telling me that on TikTok, a direct address, maybe a lot more low key, is seen as this reflection of honesty between the brand and the consumer.
Yeah, I mean, because I suppose by definition, if you really polish up an ad, then you're presenting a veneer rather than the reality. And I think that's what both Julian and Jessica and McAndrew, who helps run our social coaching service, also mentioned. She said, honesty is best. If you can try and get people involved, your customers and your teams involved and contributing, then you'll find you get a much more real experience. So that was one of the key outtakes I got from it, and I think it's a good place to start. It's also, TikTok has a resource where it helps creators come up with the right kind of content. And there's some good trends on there. They're very upfront about. So if you're looking for support or direct support, either look on the TikTok website or come to us, and we can help. We can help sort you out on that front.
Now, you mentioned that over in the Boost division of the Box Office Company, we actually help cinemas with their social media strategy, some social coaching there. Can you give us more details for any of the exhibitors that might be interested in what exactly those services include and who to get in touch with to learn more?
Yeah, no problem at all. We have, we really believe in trying to help our client base, our exhibitors, try and make the most of the digital landscape or the digital marketing opportunities that are available. Social coaching really is a reflection of the fact that we could not possibly create TikToks that have that honesty for each individual client. And so
Right. We're not an agency per se.
No, not really. No, because actually it's got to come from the heart anyway. So it's probably best managed by the teams at the cinema operator. So what we provide is, I think, a very valuable support process for that. It comes in two parts. One is social strategy, which is a sort of a bird's eye look at what you're doing across all the social media channels, and then we will help you set key performance indicators, and then we will also help you actually come up with a strategy for your cinema. So that's the first thing we do. And then we do social coaching, which really is a monthly check-in to make sure with your teams, with the people who are doing the actual creating the TikToks or whatever else it might be, or the posts on Meta, helping them actually get better every month. So we're there to help and support. And that's what the social coaching option is. And it's very cost effective, and we can do it in groups if you've got more than one social media manager. And it's starting to get some traction. So that's really exciting for us, and hopefully will help improve the output of cinemas all over the world. And if you want to get in touch with anyone, I'm a good place to start. But we have teams in America as well who can help out in North America, South America.
And to those exhibitors listening who want to learn more and inquire about these social coaching services, you can reach us over at sales@boxoffice.com to find out more. Malcolm, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to having you back again soon. And that was the Box Office Company's Malcolm McMillan talking about all the ways that cinemas can use social media strategies to their benefit. Now, onto our feature segment. We've got here Albert Lawrence making his return to the Box Office podcast, joining Chad Kenrick and myself. Albert, welcome back.
Thank you. It's great to be back in the Box Office Coliseum.
Ooh, it's not the Coliseum. We haven't rolled out the Pepsi. They mailed me a chalice, by the way. Did I tell you guys?
What?
Yeah, I did it. Well, I gave them my mailing address to our listeners. So Pepsi did this like immersive lobby activation with the Regal in Times Square, where they put this Coliseum, they call it the Coliseum, right in the lobby. And they mailed me like a Pepsi chalice.
I'm disappointed that you're not drinking out of it right now.
I haven't seen Gladiator 2. As I mentioned in the last segment, I'm going to be seeing that this week. I have been catching up with screenings. I just walked out of the press screening for Nosferatu. I will ask Albert before I ask Chad, what's the last movie you saw in theaters, Albert?
So I did just see Gladiator 2, and this was after I saw Wicked, and I felt like my theater in Gladiator 2, and this is not to spoil anything at all, but Denzel Washington walks away with every single scene that he is in. And personally, I found myself rooting for him, regardless of whether or not I feel like the film wanted me to root for him. So I wanted his characters to succeed in all aspects. And I don't know what that says about me. You'll have thoughts once you see what he's trying to get done in the film. But no, I felt like Gladiator 2 was a really wonderful communal experience. A lot of cheering, a lot of action, just great popcorn time.
Now, did you see both of them back to back or over the same weekend? How did it go?
So I saw them both over the same week, so a couple of days in between. And it's funny because I was talking with my girlfriend beforehand about like, hey, can we go see Gladiator 2? She wanted us to save it for Thanksgiving week so that we'll be with her family and we can make it a whole family thing. But I was like, but please, can I just I don't mind seeing it twice, but I gotta see this during its first week. So I will be seeing it again. Yeah.
I think it's going to be a big factor this coming weekend. Chad, how about yourself? What was the last thing you saw in the theaters?
The last thing I saw was Better Man, which we'll be talking about later in this episode, but very similar experience for me with Wicked and Gladiator in the same week. I also had a great crowd at Gladiator, very much a crowd-pleasing popcorn film.
Before we get into the December slate, I do have to bring this up. Something that Deadline came out with earlier this week. Did you guys see that John Watts interview with Deadline about the canceled sequel for Wolves?
Right. Yeah.
Dude, I like reading that. I had to do a double check just to make sure that it wasn't just like a clickbait headline. But when I read his full quote, like the fact that I don't know, did he kind of throw Apple under the bus a bit? I mean,
he threw them under the bus and then reversed the bus a couple of times to just make sure they were dead. I mean, this is the most damning statement I've heard from a major filmmaker against the streamer. Now, of course, this is a growing list now of filmmakers dissatisfied by the way their films are being treated in relation to a theatrical release. You can go all the way back to Denis Villeneuve when Warner Brothers decided out of the blue to put Dune day and date in the early days of the post-pandemic movie going. Mm-hmm. Then you had earlier this year, Doug Liman and his Roadhouse remake through Amazon MGM getting its theatrical release pulled, it going straight to streaming. Liman was not shy criticizing Amazon's decision there. But here, the quote that we have from this story from Deadline is really eye-opening. Let me read it out loud. I know we rarely do this, but I think it's worth it just so we can set the stage on where the filmmaking community is right now in regards to their films not given a fair shot with theatrical audiences. This is a quote straight from the Deadline story from director John Watts. Quote, "I showed Apple my final cut of Wolves early this year. They were extremely enthusiastic about it and immediately commissioned me to start writing a sequel. But their last-minute shift from a promised wide theatrical release to a streaming release was a total surprise and made without any explanation or discussion. I wasn't even told about it until less than a week before they announced it to the world. I was completely shocked and asked them to please not include the news that I was writing a sequel. They ignored my request and announced it in their press release anyway, seemingly to create a positive spin to the streaming pivot. And so I quietly returned the money they gave me for the sequel. I didn't want to talk about it because I was proud of the film and didn't want to generate any unnecessary negative press. I loved working with Brad and George and Amy and Austin and Porna and Slatko and would happily do it again. But the truth is, Apple didn't cancel the Wolf sequel. I did, because I no longer trusted them as a creative partner." That is John Watts, the director of Wolves, being very open on his feelings about that very last-minute decision from Apple to pull his film from theatrical release, give it a 1-week, very limited run in theaters before going to Apple TV+. Yeah, I'm really happy to see filmmakers with the weight behind them stepping up and speaking out when it comes to these matters. I do say this in the heels of the last movie I saw in a commercial screening. I saw Juror Number 2 over the weekend. My 7 p.m. screening in the Upper West Side at the AMC in Lincoln Square, completely sold out. Completely sold out. Granted, there were maybe like 7 showtimes all day in the city, right? So would it have performed like that if it got a wide release? Probably not. Okay, I get it. But something that I shared with the LA Times last week is you look at that Showtime market share for a movie like Juror Number 2, that had 0.1% of showtimes in the United States compared to, let's just compare it to Focus Features' release of Conclave, a very similar type of film, right? Adult skewing, a thriller for audiences, not really an action movie at all. Conclave had about 5% of a Showtime market share with a pretty decent marketing push and theatrical push behind it. Conclave to date has already made $29 million in the United States. We don't know how much money Juror Number 2 has made because Warner Brothers is not reporting that to the press. And frankly, it really didn't give Juror Number 2 anywhere near a decent theatrical release at all. Now, after having seen this movie, guys, and we're going to go into this in detail in a second once we go over the entire December slate, I would be shocked considering the awards race this year, if Juror number 2 isn't part of the Best Picture race, I would be shocked. The worst thing I can say about Juror number 2, which is potentially Clint Eastwood's last film, he's getting up there in age, the worst thing I can say about that movie is that it's conventional. For me, that's not a plus. For a lot of people out there, they have no issues with a conventional drama. None at all. So I wouldn't be surprised if this movie, after not really getting a first run, ends up getting a second run, a very awkward second run, after the distributor really didn't put any weight behind it when it first came out to theaters.
Yeah, because I think I'm in that camp. I don't mind a conventional drama, and this is something that I'd really like to see, but it's nowhere near me. So
it's wild. It seems like so conventional dramas, rom-coms, there are these certain genres that I don't know when we decided that they were no longer deemed theatrical enough to gain screens and whatnot. But I do feel as though with Juror number 2, this might be one of those situations, Daniel, where, like, as you mentioned, with award season coming up, I feel like Academy voters might actually find this as a cause for them to jump behind. But I do feel as though people feel like there's something to fight for here. There is a cause to champion. And with Clint Eastwood really being the face of so much history within the industry and so much legacy.
Albert, so much history and legacy within Warner Brothers. Forget the industry within that studio. And this isn't to show up any executive or anything like that. Warner Brothers has some of the best distribution teams in the industry. I know a lot of them personally. They do a fantastic job with anything you give them. They just need the ability to do their job. And I'm sure if they had been given a crack at this, they would have really delivered for Juror number 2. Unfortunately, this probably got lost in the politics of getting the movie made, getting the movie released, marketed. I don't know. I don't know why this got the first run it got. At this point, I don't care. I just wish it gets a second run that it deserves. Well, let's talk about award season, because December is going to be a really, really competitive month. We start with a December 6th slate that is going to be competing with the second weekend of Moana 2, meaning Moana 2 is probably going to dominate the charts, and will still be competing with weekend 3 of Gladiator 2 and with weekend 3 of Wicked, meaning the movies here aren't really built to compete with those tentpoles. They're built to come out, gain a little bit of traction, some word of mouth, and that's why we're going to be profiling the limited and platform releases in the month of December from major distributors. Let's start here with Y2K from A24. Albert, this jumped out at you when we were planning this conversation.
Yeah, it's funny, especially for us to be talking about this during this episode where you just had a conversation about the importance and significance of theaters and companies using social media to really tie in. So with Y2K, the way that I even discovered this title was I saw on my timeline the posters that A24 released, and all the posters with the cast in them are very, very early Millennium style posters. Like they remind me of the Backstreet Boys album Millennium. Shout out if y'all remember that. But like, so you've got whether it's the cell phone, whether it's the style, whether it's even like that's very specific, like fisheye lens, wide angle. So I love that A24 knows what they're doing with this title. I saw the poster and I was like, oh, this is for me, because it's a disaster comedy that takes place, going from 1999 into 2000. And for those of us who can remember when we thought that, oh my gosh, the computers aren't going to know how to change on over with the time. So everybody like, get your money on now. And do you remember the merchandising back then where people were selling like plushes of like bugs? And it's like, this is the bug that's going to take down our entire world. I'm very curious to see how Jonah Hill, how the folks over there at A24 have figured out a way to take this very nostalgic piece and relatively recent nostalgia and package it up into something that's going to drive us to theaters.
The only disaster that I know that happened between 1999 and 2000 was me going through puberty in middle school in Miami, Florida. That's my 2000s disaster movie. It's there to counter-program, and I think it occupies a space in the market that is unique. And talking about unique movies, we've got from director Joshua Oppenheimer, whom you might recognize as maybe one of the most exciting documentary filmmakers out there, making his narrative feature film debut with The End, which is an apocalyptic musical film with a really interesting cast, including Tilda Swinton, who is worth the price of admission in most movies that you watch with her in them. I love Oppenheimer's work as a documentary filmmaker. Has made for me some of the most powerful documentaries I've ever seen. I don't really associate him with more of a madcap genre bending exercise like this. This is going to be interesting. I think this is something to keep an eye on. Talking about a quirky and a little bit different here, another high concept title coming out on December 6th is Night Bitch from Searchlight. Amy Adams starring in this movie. Rebecca Pauley interviewed the filmmaker. You can find that on our website, boxofficepro.com, next week. And that is also in the November edition of Box Office Pro magazine. An interesting high concept here, but again, I'm not sure. Is there going to be enough of that female audience left over after Moana 2 and after Wicked for a third cinema visit for something as offbeat as Night Bitch? Chad, I don't know if you've got the synopsis there, but let's call it's not really a conventional title here.
Yeah, it's kind of a magical realism style story about a stay-at-home mom who sometimes becomes a dog.
Sure.
It is based on a book, so I don't know how much of a following the book has.
Yeah, I think that's a really positive here from Searchlight to be able to bring that out in theaters. And I can tell you, Marielle Heller, the filmmaker behind this film, has made some really interesting movies. In 2018, she directed Can You Ever Forgive Me with Melissa McCarthy. I thought that was a great
I love
little
that
gem.
film. Yeah.
Great movie. Audiences might have remember her 2019 title, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. That was also a movie with Tom Hanks that I think did fairly well. So the filmmaker here, I think, has some cachet behind her. I think she's a very interesting talent, and that would probably drive my purchase to see that movie.
But Chad and Daniel, I think that it is brilliant that Searchlight is getting this in when it is, because it needs to get out of the way before Wolfman comes into theaters in January. I'm sorry, Blumhouse is going to clean up.
A little bit of distance between both titles. That's a really good point.
Good double feature.
Well, we went from laughing at high concept movies on December 6th to going to two pretty somber titles here on December 13th. And no, I am not talking about Kraven the Hunter or that Lord of the Rings animated movie that I can't pronounce. Lord of the Rerum? Man. I want that movie to leave already.
No.
I just don't want to. Dude, do you want to give it a shot? Here's Albert Lawrence trying to pronounce that subtitle. Go for it. It's all you, buddy.
I believe it's Rohirrim, but that's only
there
because Chad just said it.
All right, fine. Chad said it off air. So, okay. Thanks, Chad. Anyway, those aren't the titles that we're going to be joking about, because actually we need some levity here. Both titles coming up here on December 13th are, I think, prime award contenders, very strong dramas from Paramount, the journalism drama on the events that took place in the 1972 Munich Olympics, September 5. Chad, you saw that already at the Denver Film Festival. You interviewed Ben Chaplin, the actor. What was your reaction of this title?
It's actually one of my favorite films this year. It's really interesting to have that journalism perspective behind the scenes, kind of removed from the events that are happening, but also the pressures that those individuals faced when covering something that they weren't necessarily prepared to cover. Daniel, you saw Nickel Boys, which is the other title that we're talking about here. And I know that you enjoyed that film just as much as I enjoyed September 5.
At this point, because I'm still catching up with a lot of movies, it's the movie to beat in 2024. Hands down, it's my favorite movie so far this year. We've got the director, Ramel Ross, joining us in this podcast when it comes out that December 13 weekend. I don't know if you guys are big documentary fans. He directed a beautiful lyrical documentary called Hale County This Morning, This Evening back in 2018. A gorgeous documentary. I highly, highly recommend it. And that's how I'm going to speak about this title. Nickel Boys, for me, is a triumph in not only this year's award slate, but in using the power of cinema to adapt a celebrated novel and not to be beholden to the novel itself or the author. Of course, The Nickel Boys being a novel by Colson Whitehead, I believe it's a Pulitzer Prize-winning novel. There's a lot of baggage sometimes that can come with a pedigree like that for a filmmaker to tackle. I think Ramel did a fantastic job in distancing himself from the novel and using the cinematic language to bring us what I think is a beautiful adaptation and one of the best movies this year.
Daniel, when you talk about Nickel Boys, a lot of the buzz that I've heard surrounding this film coming out of the festival circuit was I feel like there were some critics that honestly just did not know how to digest the film, because it's not like when we talk about conventional films, this is not that. This is not
Exactly.
conventional at all. And so I do think that there is a beautiful space for us to challenge ourselves sometimes and to go into some things that we know aren't necessarily going to be easy. But I know just within listening to Ramel talk, and you know this more than me because you've actually spoken to him, that he seems like a very sensitive filmmaker who is also incredibly aware of his audience. And he does not want to, baby the audience. He wants to challenge the audience some. And I do feel like if you're going to create a film with such rich material as its foundational material, that you've got to put that into the hands of somebody who is not only capable, but also passionate. And it sounds like Ramel pulls it off.
It's a film with a visual ambition, Albert. And we don't always say that. Being willing to go to film grammar and film language and innovate with that to tell a story, the ambition in that alone is worth watching this movie, but I also think it's effective. I really, truly do. I really recommend it. But then again, like you mentioned, it is going to be a divisive movie because it is not conventional. By design, it's not conventional. That's going to scare some people away. But I really hope audiences give this movie a shot and the attention it deserves. So I really, really want to emphasize my support for this film. And I can't wait for our listeners to hear that interview in a couple of weeks.
I have a quick question for Chad, though, regarding September 5. Is this one that's going to be able to sit in the pantheon of journalism movies like The Post and Spotlight?
I think so. Daniel, you talked about Spotlight a couple weeks ago and some of your frustrations maybe with the sort of monologue moments. And I think that this film is able to capture the spirit of what was happening without sort of doing those token monologues. It's very much an ensemble piece and it feels like that. And it's such a strong cast that I think it definitely could. And it's interesting that these two films are coming out on the same weekend because obviously they're very different, but in a way they're both challenging and asking challenging questions of the audience. Certainly September 5 has left me thinking about it days, weeks later, which I really appreciated.
Unfortunately, that weekend, all the headlines are going to go to that Lord of the Rings thing, Craven the Hunter, and they're going to detract from these two movies that really deserve a lot more attention, a lot more conversation. Both of them are going to be expanding through the month of December, and I have a feeling we'll be playing well into January and maybe into February as the awards race heats up. Let's now go to December 20th because this is an interesting release date. We've got a couple blockbusters here in Sonic 3 and Mufasa opening everywhere. If you want our analysis and box office forecast on those, listen to last week's episode. Chris Randleman from our box office forecasting panel offering some really, really good insights on those titles. We don't want to double up on that analysis. Chris did a fantastic job. So we're going to talk about the other openers on that date. Let's start here with one of the wide openers here from Angel Studios is Homestead, based on, I believe it's a streaming series that's playing now or is going to be playing around the release of this movie. More of a genre play from our friends at Angel. If you're expecting like a Christmas time faith-based movie, this isn't it. This is a post-apocalyptic thriller, right, with a lot of action vibes to it that I think are going to appeal to audiences. There's a throwback aspect to the marketing that I really appreciate. It seems like an action movie from the 80s. And I am really, really interested in seeing how this plays competing in a crowded corridor in theaters. Let's go down the list here on December 20th because we've got two other movies that will be expanding slowly through the holiday season and well into January. Let's start with The Room Next Door from Sony Pictures Classics. I got to cross something off my bucket list in this job a couple of years back when I interviewed Almodovar for our centennial issue of the magazine. One of my favorite conversations I've had with a filmmaker, probably one of the filmmakers who I've seen their entire filmography. I don't have too many of those, but I love his work. I haven't seen this yet. Chad, you caught it at the Denver Film Festival.
I talked to cinematographer Adu Grau about it. There's a lot of beautiful visuals, as we're used to with Almodovar. And there's actually a painting, Edward Hopper painting in the film. And I talked to Adu about some of the inspiration they were pulling from that. So there's a lot of very beautiful static camera shots with all of the colors that Almodovar is so well known for.
That's what I love about that filmmaker. His intertextual interests in engaging with plays or with other movies or with books. It's fascinating. I don't know if you guys caught his adaptation of the Alice Munro short story, not entire short story collection, a couple of Alice Munro stories, Runaway. It came out a couple of years back. It's called Julieta. Wonderful movie. Again, when we talk about what adaptation can do in terms of adapting a very heralded recent book and turning it into your own as a filmmaker, I think he does a great job in adapting that novel. I'm excited to see what he does in this one. In the other movie coming out that weekend from A24 and director Brady Corbett, we've got The Brutalist. I saw this a couple of weeks ago in a, let's say, very unfortunate setting. I didn't know it was 4 hours with a intermission built in, and I skipped breakfast.
You needed those concessions at the movie theater.
Man, I regretted that. But it's a really good movie, actually. Of course, it's going to be difficult for that to claim showtimes. This is a fictional movie about a architect between late 1940s and I think up until the 1980s. By the time the movie ends, in the United States, a Jewish immigrant story set mostly in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, which is in the suburbs of Philly. As this movie comes out, I will be in the suburbs of Philly myself, not far at all from Doylestown, Pennsylvania. So I know the area. My wife's family is Jewish living in the area. So it's an interesting movie to sort of engage in that level. A tough watch. I'll be upfront about it. This is a drama with capital letters, but well worth your time if you have it.
Adrian Brody and Felicity Jones have both been getting quite a bit of awards buzz surrounding this. Like, Daniel, was there anything in their performances that you saw that was like, oh, okay, I can see Oscar Gold going for this?
That's a good question, Albert. I think they are going to be part of the awards conversation in the coming weeks. They're very strong performances. And Brady Corbett's really emerging as a filmmaker that is very pro-actor. I think the performances in his movie benefit from really great dialogue. Him and his writing partner, Mona Fastfold, now have done 2 stories together. And Mona did the story behind Brady's last feature, Vox Lux, in 2018, which I thought delivered a very great performance from Natalie Portman. I think that energy in the screenplays carries over in this title, The Brutalist, coming out later this year. So yeah, I think that's a very good shout. We will be hearing a lot about this movie. And again, if you do have those 4 hours, it's worth investing them in a movie like this. A really interesting movie on the concept of art and ambitious art existing without patronage from someone very wealthy and what that relationship is like. It actually feels a lot like a meditation on Hollywood today. If you want to make one of these ambitious movies, like we just heard you talk about, Albert, when we were talking about Ramel Ross's Nickel Boys, or even something like this from Brady Corbett, when you want to make something that pushes the audience a little bit, what do you have to accept as part of the package to get that done, to get that made? Right? If you have a vision that's outside the ordinary, what are the sacrifices that you have to begrudgingly accept to or endure in some cases to see that final vision through? If you're interested in these ideas, this is worth your time. I totally understand if a general audience is not, though. And now let's turn to the Christmas Day releases, because we've got, what is this, a handful? Wow. I mean, packed slate here. It's going to be really tough for all these movies to fight for screens, especially around the blockbusters that are coming out in the weekends around them. But I do hope they find an audience. Let's start with a spicy movie of the list from A24, the erotic thriller Baby Girl. I love saying the words erotic thriller because we don't get those anymore. We never get those anymore. Yeah. I love to have them back.
Yeah, Daniel, you've seen this. So what were your thoughts?
It reminds me a lot of 1967's Belle de Jour, the Buñuel movie with Catherine Deneuve playing a bourgeois housewife that decides to willingly start working in a brothel, and she discovers her sexuality. Really interesting erotic thriller from the 60s. There's some parallels between that and this movie, where Nicole Kidman plays a high-powered CEO. Now, it's not a brothel, but she gets into a weird, let's say spicy, for lack of a better word, relationship with one of her interns in New York City over the holidays. Really, really interesting movie. An adult movie, again, not for a general audience, but for people that enjoy erotic thrillers, you're going to have a good time with this one.
Yeah, bring back the erotic thrillers. I feel like, we're back in the 90s to a degree with this. I think that for a while, there was this idea that a lot of the movies that were coming to theaters right now were chaste, in a certain aspect. And so
Yeah.
it
Well, I
seems
would
as
even say sexless, Albert, honestly. I mean, there's movies
Yeah.
where sexuality doesn't even seem to be something that exists. I'm
no.
looking at you, comic book adaptations, and I think that
Mm-hmm.
it's not that it detracts from anything. It seems dishonest at a certain point. And it's something
Yeah.
we spoke about with Rebecca. I know Rebecca's a big fan of Luca Guadagnino's Challengers, and it's upfront celebration of sex being fun and that not having to be scandalous.
Yeah, I think my wife and I, would go see a film like this. I don't know how many others would be in that same camp, but
There was a
yeah.
time when that wasn't a weird thing to
Yeah,
say.
yeah.
Say, like, I'm going with my wife to watch an erotic thriller, an R-rated thriller at the movies. But all of a sudden, I don't know, maybe it's part of this infantilization of the movies where everything harkens back to an IP designed for 8-year-old boys.
Mm-hmm.
That, how do you shoehorn an honest take on sexuality on, I don't know, a DC Comics movie or a Marvel movie? It's right. That would feel like imposing that. That just seems to be what a lot of folks go out to these days. But it's not everything. And that's why I'm really happy that a movie like this is in theaters.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of buzz in the younger demographic with that film. So we'll see how that evolves and changes.
Mm-hmm.
Another steamy affair between a older person and a much younger person is the central plot point of Robert Eggers' Nosferatu, coming out from Focus Features on December 25th. Big age difference there. Problematic. We have to say that out loud. But man, does the movie deliver? If you're in the mood for like a slow burn Robert Eggers horror movie, that's what this is. I just walked out of that press screening. Again, it's kind of like The Northman or The Lighthouse. It's not going to be your multiplex movie for everyone, but it's not your art house movie for a select audience either. It's going to be your one screen at a multiplex all over the country where people go and find it. And I love that niche that Focus Features is giving Eggers in his return to the horror genre in a storied movie like Nosferatu. I mean, it's a property that has 2 different movies coming behind it. One of them by F.W. Murnau, one of them by Werner Herzog. Both of them masterpieces, both of them great examples and really iconic examples of their respective moments in German film history. You divorce that German aspect in this adaptation, in Robert Eggers' stab at this property, and it gives you very compelling results. Again, it's not going to be a Smile 2 or a Terrifier 3. It's the opposite of that. It's a slow burn, it's atmospheric, and it's really, really scary.
Yeah, I feel like if we want the family version of a ghoul going after a romantic interest, we've had Beetlejuice earlier this year.
I will say in the previous versions of this title, in the Murnau version, you had Max Schreck playing Count Orlok, which is the Dracula stand-in, and then you had Klaus Kinski in a fantastic performance doing the same in the Herzog version. Those versions of the vampire were a little bit more refrained, a little bit more introverted. This one, it's a very spirited Count Orlok in this take. That's what surprised me the most.
I can't wait to see it. I've got a screening next week. I sent this morning, Regal released their sarcophagus popcorn tub. I'm so ready to eat some popcorn out of that and watch this movie.
But gentlemen, do we need to, and I don't know, maybe we can't do it this episode, but at some point, do we need to have a conversation about Bill Skarsgård? Because I'm kind of concerned that culturally, we are not giving this dude the props that he deserves. He jumps into roles and we completely lose the fact that this is like a really good looking guy, but he is, whether we're talking about The Crow, whether we're talking about Pennywise, now whether we're talking about, Count Orlok, he is so brave and dives into these roles. I don't know, like in my eyes, he's almost like another version of Andy Serkis, who's just someone who you just know he's going to deliver every time. You don't recognize him from film.
He loses himself in the character here. And by the way, if you can watch this with immersive audio, I saw this with a Dolby Atmos sound system. The audio is an entire element of this movie. It's really a very sensual movie in that regard. Visually, it delivers, and the audio just really helps drive the horror home. It's a slow burn. Like I said, if you want more of an action horror movie, Terrifier 3 is right there. Yeah. It's right there for you. If you want that, you can go see that. If you want something different, December 25th, Christmas with Count Orlok. Now, let's go to the based on real people part of the slate, because we've got 3 different public figures in 3 different movies based on them and their lives. Let's start with the champion boxer Clarissa Shields and her life story in Amazon MGM's The Fire Inside. I've been wanting to see this for a while. This got rescheduled. I think it was supposed to come out over the summer. Amazon thought there was potential here in the awards race. It's coming out now on Christmas. I haven't seen this yet. Have you guys caught it?
It was at the Denver Film Festival. I missed it, but Ryan Destiny did win the Rising Star Award there. So there's been a lot of talk about her performance.
And when it comes to Brian Tyree Henry, I just feel like you can never count him out. Remember when he got nominated for an Oscar for his role in that Jennifer Lawrence film Causeway, which I remember that even as somebody who watches just about everything that comes on now, I did not see that coming.
Clarissa Shields is one of the best fighters of this era, male and female. I don't want to distinguish between gender because that is how good she is. Really hasn't had a classic opponent to match her at all. Maybe if you're going to knock her legacy as an athlete, is that nobody could even challenge her at the level she's at. So it's going to be interesting to see how her life story is depicted on screen. I think the boxing community, and yes, I said that out loud, the boxing community is going to respond and see this movie. Also, I'm a sucker for boxing movies. You guys know that. Ooh, this is a hard sell for me, but bless Paramount for taking this swing. Robbie Williams, the British pop superstar, part of his life story coming on screen, and it is told with him being played by a CGI ape. Oh,
yeah.
Chad, you saw it.
I think swing is the right word, and it feels like a big swing. I think not all of it works perfectly, but I think there's some really, really interesting things in there. Michael Gracie, who directed The Greatest Showman, is directing this film, and visually there's some really fascinating things happening.
Earlier this episode, we said, listen, it might not work, it might not be for you, but give it a shot. It's something different. Having seen the trailer, it is definitely not for me. But you know what? There's probably an audience out there for it. Like Paddington and Prue coming out in January, this seems to be more of a UK-based title than for the US. Obviously, the pop star in question is a huge star there, less so here in the US. And I am about to do this in this transition, spoken in the same breath, Robbie Williams and Bob Dylan. We've got the Bob Dylan story, or part of the story, because it's a long story. A Complete Unknown coming out from Searchlight, director James Mangold, who usually specializes in these sort of like late year dramas that are accessible for a wide audience. This is coming out from Searchlight Pictures on Christmas Day. I'm actually seeing this as soon as this podcast episode wraps up, the press screening here in New York. I'm a Bob Dylan fan, but, not an obsessive fan. I think I'm just like a general bandwagon person that's into Dylan. Are you guys Dylan fans? Because I know there's like a cult around this.
I'm not a super fan by any means, but I'm looking forward to seeing this backstory because I don't know a lot about his origins. So I think that's where, for me, with some of the other biopics that come out, that I find really engaging when I actually don't know too much about that artist and how they rose to fame.
Yeah,
I completely agree with you.
And I think that I'll be walking into the theater with a similar mindset, Chad. I think that a lot of folks that are coming on into this, and I'm sure that that Searchlight is hoping that this is the case. I think we're coming in partially because of Timothée Chalamet.
I was about to say that. I think Chalamet, honestly, is the selling point to this movie over Dylan, especially for younger audiences. We'll come up with our reactions to those movies as we get closer to the holiday season. We don't want to break embargoes here, but suffice to say, 5 interesting limited releases on Christmas Day and a whole bunch more coming out throughout the entire month of December. Albert Lawrence, thank you so much for joining us. Chad, thank you again for joining us. And to our audience, thank you for listening and downloading this podcast. We are back every Thursday, including next one, with more updates on the theatrical exhibition market. On behalf of myself and my colleagues, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you again soon.